Welcome to another episode of Off the Menu. I'm Vince Franchini from Tumblr House, here with the didactic Charles Coulombe.
Didactic?
Yeah, see, I can use big words too.
Well, I like that. Didactic.
Yeah.
Which means I teach.
Yeah.
I like that. Okay, didactic.
There you go.
All right, I'm happy with that. Thank you.
Uh-huh. So what's new?
What's new? Well, several things. I have to tell you, Lenten privations have really caused to put their icy hand on the whole Tumblr House building.
I know.
You know where I was before I was here?
Where?
I stuck my nose in the executive dining room up on the 28th floor.
And?
Wow. To show you that our bosses are really independents. You know that usually this would be foie gras and prime rib day.
No? What do they have?
In honor of Lent, Savruga caviar and lobster.
Oh, wow. That's very penitential.
It's very penitential. I'm very sorry for what they're going through. Luckily, in order to help us with our issues, the commissary is featuring last week's haddock. Apparently some was left over.
Oh, that's so nice of them.
I think so. Well, I was talking to, what's-her-face, Donna on the secretarial pool, and she explained to me that Mr. Martin says that fish, at least the fish you give employees, is like game, and it's better as you age it.
Wow, that's good to know.
Yeah, I would never have known myself. But no, other than that, they were all going about with very long faces upstairs. So, now whether or not it was because of what they'd just eaten or because I was up there, I don't know, but they didn't look happy.
Mm-hmm.
At any rate, maybe, you know what it is? I think it's because there was no breakfast served.
Oh, yeah?
There wasn't any breakfast in either the commissary or the executive dining room today. So I think we're skipping breakfast for Lent.
Well, that's good, I guess.
I don't know. That's, all I know is I'm tired of haddock already, but that's all right. I'm sure they'll give us something else like tilapia. Anyway, let me see, what else? So it's not just the beginning of Lent, and it's not really, you know. These days are actually still part of Septuagesima. Lent does not really begin until Sunday.
Wow.
Which is the first Sunday of Lent. Now, mind you, the law started...
We start Ash Wednesday.
Ash Wednesday, the very beginning, the stroke of midnight on Ash Wednesday.
Yeah.
In New Orleans, Louisiana, the police rode through the streets, and at that very hour, the Key of Rex, the Key of Cobus, and the Roosevelt Hotel toasted. And that was the end of Mardi Gras, and Ash Wednesday, and Lent began in that sense. But, liturgically, Septuagesima Sunday still covers Septuagesima season covers Ash Wednesday, the Thursday, the Friday, and the Saturday. So that's 4 days.
Why do they do that?
Well, for one thing, those 4 days buy you your Sundays in Lent.
Oh, okay. That makes sense.
And then the other thing, let's see. Well, it was Lincoln's birthday this week, which is a very important for us all to remember, I guess. Mm-hmm. Mardi Gras came to a screeching halt, as we know, to be replaced by Ash Wednesday. Let me see, what else can I say? This is a pretty slow week. I'm heading off to Washington, but I'll be back before it's time to do the next show.
Mm-hmm.
Our nation's capital.
You like our nation's capital?
I do like our nation's capital.
What do you like about it? What are the sights you see?
Oh, gosh. Well, let me see. Martin's Tavern in Georgetown, the Round Robin Bar at the Willard Hotel, the Old Europe Restaurant. Oh, you mean in terms of things people would see?
Well, no, really, what you see. What interests you?
Well, I'll tell you, actually, the Smithsonian Institution, so there are many varying kinds. The museums there. St. Matthew's Cathedral, which is the diocesan cathedral. The National Shrine of the Immaculate Conception. The National Cathedral, which is the big Episcopalian Gothic church. The White House and the Capitol building, I haven't been able to get in for years. Not being, a member of the ruling classes. The Library of Congress is a gorgeous building. The Folger Library is nice. Boy, there's so much. And again, the old Europe, a lot of eateries and bars I love there. The Willard Hotel, the old Ebbett's Grill. Oh man, so many places are closed though. The Guardsman in Georgetown. My club, the City Tavern in Georgetown.
Wow.
There are a number of churches. Old St. Mary's in Chinatown, and the Ordinariate has a church there too. The name of which escapes me at the moment.
Washington has D.C. has a Chinatown?
It does.
Oh, interesting.
Complete with Chinese.
Wow.
And I mean that's just the area around now. I mean that's just in D.C.
Mm-hmm.
But when I can, I mean I love to go to Baltimore, down to Southern Maryland, where the Catholics still hold out to some degree. Into Virginia, Richmond, Williamsburg, Jamestown, Charlottesville. I love all that area.
Mm-hmm.
I love the South. You know, the joke about Washington is that they used to say it combined northern charm with southern efficiency. But I love DC.
Mm-hmm.
I love the statues. I love the restaurants. I love I love it.
Good. Okay, let's get started, shall we?
Oh, I think we can. What else we got?
Augustine Pinnock sent in 2 questions.
Hello, Augustine. Hope you're doing well.
I understand that King Alfred the Great had a cause for canonization in England until the Anglican schism under Henry VIII. Do you know anything in Alfred's life that might demonstrate his sanctity?
Yes, indeed I do. That was his enforcement of religious observance, his personal religious observance, and his work for the church, both in terms of education, diocesan structure, and all that. He was a very similar character in some ways to Charlemagne. Now, the other thing about him is that some treat him as a blessed already. As you say, his cause for canonization, per se, was derailed by the Reformation. But we can only hope that someday it gets picked up again.
Okay, I mean, so it's kind of a long time, enough time has elapsed. I mean, it's surprising that just
well, I mean, he had a local cultus. People began to venerate him as a saint almost as soon as he died.
Wow.
And that was pretty common up until the Reformation. Interesting enough, the Orthodox in England venerate him as a saint, claiming that since he lived before 1054 and he was a holy man, he's one of theirs.
I see. So you still need that energy to sort of get things going.
Yeah.
The canonization. So that sounds like a good one to create a society for.
Oh yeah, the Society of Alfred the Great for that end. And they just found recently what may be his relics. You know how they found Richard III's body?
I forgot.
A couple of years ago, they found Richard III who'd been killed at Bosworth Field. They had a big solemn interment of him at Leicester Cathedral. Well, they found relics, bones that they think are probably Alfred's.
Isn't that strange that a king's bones are just lying out somewhere? And
Well,
I mean, is that...
not really. See, what happened, remember that when these guys would die, they would get they were generally buried in monasteries. Like with Richard III, he was buried in a Franciscan monastery. They didn't want to bury him in Westminster Abbey or Windsor, because that would be implying that he was a rightful king. And remember, that was what that Civil War, the War of the Roses, was about.
Okay.
Over which of them were the rightful monarch. So, House of Lancaster was extinct, but their cousins, the House of Tudor, take up the fight. Henry VII wins, kills Richard III. Well, he's not going to bury him with the other kings of England, but he's going to put someplace. So he's put in this Franciscan house. That house was suppressed when Henry VIII suppressed the monasteries. And as it so happened, eventually they built a car park on top of where the church had been. And it was when they were going through the car park that they found his grave. Well, similarly, when Alfred the Great died, he ended up at a place called Hyde Abbey. And with the dissolution of the monasteries, Hyde was destroyed. There was some work done on the area in the 19th century. and they found some bones, which they stored in a cupboard in some museum somewhere. And now they have reason to think that those are Alfred's bones.
I mean, I guess it's just sort of surprising that it's not documented, or it's not like a tourist place or a place that people visit, like, oh, here's King Alfred's bones.
You would think so, but you got to bear in mind, number one, that there's an awful lot of that kind of stuff over there.
So a lot of competition.
I mean, gosh, there are kings and saints and shrines and churches and cathedrals everywhere.
Oh, wow.
Remember that with us here in California, we're excited over the missions.
Okay.
Which are the biggest thing we've got in terms of Catholic history.
Yeah, that's for sure.
They're 200 years old. That's nothing. You go to Europe, every district has been there for over 1,000 years.
Wow.
And there's just a ton of stuff. I know, and for Augustine, who's English, by the way, I actually know him personally.
Mm-hmm.
I know this will sound very silly and naive to your ears, but believe me, one of the biggest differences between Americans and Europeans, including the English despite Brexit, is the time scale and also the space. If you're right, in the sense that if a figure analogous to Alfred the Great were here, we would know all about him.
Yeah.
But that's because there's so little for him to compete with. I mean, we only had 250 years.
Yeah.
Whereas over there, my heavens, it's just chock-a-block with kings and princes and saints.
They're a dime a dozen.
Yeah, pretty much. So, you know. But at any rate, to answer your question, you know, I think it would be a prime candidate for somebody to start a society, to begin putting out prayer cards, trying to get miracles, etc. And then, if it goes anywhere, getting one of the dioceses to propose him for canonization. Or to have his cultus regularized. Remember that a lot of individuals like Charlemagne, who had a pre-existing cultus before, instead of going through the regular canonization process, the Holy See simply confirms the cultus and calls them blessed.
What does that mean, regularize? So what are the benefits? I don't understand.
Well, I mean, the benefits are there's simply no question that the individual belongs on the calendar. In other words, if someone's cultus is regularized, it means that Rome has recognized it as a valid cultus. And so you have specific prayers, you can say masses in his honor, and so on.
Oh, okay.
I mean, if someone is not at least to bless it, you can't really offer prayers in their honor.
Oh.
You can offer requiems for them if you like, but you can't offer prayers in their honor.
Okay.
Except privately. That's how every servant of God starts out. The problem, of course, with the canonization for a figure like Alfred is that it's so far back.
Yeah.
What you really would have to depend upon was the level of devotion that was already existing to him back when. And then, as I say, it would be a question of the Holy See regularizing the cultus. So.
Okay.
What's the second question?
The second question, you have stated that canonizations are infallible. However, is there not a school of theologians who do not think this is the case? I do accept that canonizations being infallible is the majority view, and supported by such men as the Angelic Doctor and Benedict XIV. But is it not a matter of opinion and not de fide?
That's a very good question, and one I can't give a de fide answer to. Except to say that, you know, Pope Benedict XIV and St. Thomas, who were both great scholars in their way, and had, by the way, several differences of opinion in different areas, nevertheless are completely agreed on this particular point. And I can't think of any theologian of greater weight who would disagree with them. Whether or not it's de fide, just sitting here looking at you, I don't know. But I'd be very happy if any of our watchers can give us a better answer than I can.
I mean, what is the basis of the point that canonizations are infallible?
Well, the basis of it is that St. Thomas and Pope Benedict XIV say so.
That's it?
pretty much. And mind you, they didn't just come up with that out of their heads. They've got long lines of reasoning to prove their points.
Okay, that's interesting.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of stuff like that in the church.
Okay.
The only things that a Catholic is absolutely required to believe are what are present in the four creeds.
Okay.
And the three infallible definitions of the 19th century. That's all a Catholic absolutely de fide must believe.
Okay.
Wow. And
Okay.
what, of course, it's making the current period so interesting is that the frontiers of what is and what is not actually magisterial are getting tested constantly. But that's a whole other issue.
Okay.
So, at any rate, I guess I'm sorry I can't give you an absolutely definitive answer. I'll look into it, and I would suggest all of our viewers who have an interest do so as well.
Yeah, I was under the false impression that it was dogma, that it was almost like ex cathedra,
Well,
like
yeah,
a pope proclaiming a saint.
Yeah, I mean that's what I've always been taught, and it's not something that I've ever had occasion to disagree with, particularly because I know who proposed it. And it may be that it is de fide. I just have to look a little more into it, that's all.
Okay.
Remember, I just had this sprung on me today.
I know. Okay, next question is from Joe. I was very intrigued by your story about the Society of Charles the Martyr. It sounds like a great thing to be a member of, but how can a Catholic join an Anglican devotional society? I guess part of my confusion comes with my lack of understanding about Anglo-Catholicism. To me, it's either Catholic or not.
Well, I agree with you. It is Catholic or not. But what does that actually mean, practically speaking? I will give you an example from life. I knew a lady, a Serbian Orthodox lady, who was a convinced believer, although she was a practicing Serbian Orthodox, a convinced believer in the supremacy of the Pope and of the existence of purgatory, which an Orthodox is not supposed to believe in. At the same time, I've known of a cardinal who apparently didn't believe in transubstantiation and whose diocese was in material schism from Rome while he reigned over it. You're either Catholic or you're not, absolutely. Which of these two is Catholic?
Well, aren't these two exceptions to the rule?
Well, they're not exceptions at all. The rule is the rule. Which is Catholic, which is not. One of them believes everything the Church teaches, the other does not.
I mean, most Orthodox in name do not subscribe to the beliefs that lady had.
That's correct. But a lot of them do.
Okay, so is Society of Charles the Martyr like that?
Well,
I'm setting
the prequel.
Okay.
I'm setting the prequel. So I go back. Who is the Catholic? Who is the schismatic? The Czech or the Cardinal?
Well,
indeed.
Okay.
You don't want to say it, and I won't make it. I'll say it.
You say
She
it.
was, he wasn't. I mean, the truth of the matter is, you are one thing or the other. You're in the church or you're not. But when it's in the area of schism, as opposed to heresy, especially when there's nothing juridically marking you out as a schismatic, it becomes very much a question of where your brain's at. If you have one.
Mm-hmm.
Which again, modern people often we don't need to. We've been exempted from that by Almighty God. Now,
well, they have one. Just it's very small. The brainstem.
Yeah, the little brainstem,
Yeah.
and then they've got the big So, as far as the Society of King Charles the Martyr goes, the next question is, of course, what are Anglo-Catholics? And it is a big non-monolithic movement. But before we even talk about them, we got to talk about King Charles.
Okay.
Now, King Charles was, so far as one can tell, outwardly speaking, not a member of the Catholic Church. Yet, he wrote to several popes his belief in all the dogmas that they themselves, they being the popes in question, believed in, including their spiritual supremacy.
Mm.
He didn't believe in their power to depose kings, which is not a matter of Catholic dogma anyway.
That's interesting.
He venerated the Virgin Mary. He was baptized. He negotiated for reunion with Rome, and that's one of the reasons the Puritans killed him.
Okay.
So, the question as to whether or not King Charles was a Catholic or was not, you have to look at various things. He said when he died, that I die a member of the Church of England as I received it from my father. But we know that people of his time, when they wanted to show they were anti-Roman, called themselves Protestant, which he never did. Instead, assuring Pope after Pope that he himself was a Catholic in the same sense that they were.
Okay.
It's a pretty weird situation, isn't it?
Well, that's interesting. It's definitely a gray area. I mean, I'll play devil's advocate and say, he says he's a member of the Church of England. Wouldn't that be a strike against the creed, one holy apostolic church? He's saying he's a part of a different church.
Except that as far as he was concerned, the Church of England was part of the Catholic Church.
Okay. Well, it's complicated then.
It's very complicated, which is why at the end of the day, what one has to do is pray that Rome will one day resolve it.
Yeah.
And that, but the problem is Rome never resolves anything unless people are after her to resolve something.
Like everything else,
like
to
everything
be honest.
Else. And Rome has other things that are probably more important to her at the moment. I'll give you an example. Charles's grandson, James II, his cause for canonization was opened.
Mm-hmm.
There are miracles. But then the French Revolution came along.
Uh-oh.
And suddenly the Holy See was busy with other stuff.
Distracted.
Yeah, distracted. And it was never picked up again after the Revolution. But one day, please God, it'll be resolved. Of course, the only way that would happen is if a group of people began to press for its being resolved. What you can't do is turn around and say, oh, you mustn't press to have the issue resolved, because that wouldn't be Catholic.
Ah, I see.
You see, if you're going to say, well, you can't advance the proposition. Well, no. If you don't advance the proposition, it won't get answered.
Okay.
A definitive judgment on the case of Charles I is only possible by the Pope. But that will never happen unless people ask the question. Unless people advance the proposition. Can I tell you that Charles I is a Catholic saint? No, any more than I could tell you any servant of God is.
Okay. I see. So we don't know, but we're going to press the Pope, and he will make the judgment. It's not. In other words, it's not on us.
No. But none of these causes ever go anywhere unless somebody pushes them.
Interesting.
Of course, then, if they finally definitively rule, nah.
But we don't want to risk being wrong, because that's embarrassing.
If that were the case, since we're usually wrong,
What?
we should probably never set foot outside our houses.
Ah.
Stay home, everyone. Don't go outside. Now, to answer your question as to how... Now, it gets a little bit more interesting, though. Because when Pope Benedict XVI created the Anglican Ordinariates, he wanted them specifically to preserve what he called the Anglican patrimony for the Catholic Church.
What does that mean?
That's exactly what we are in the process of developing. Right now as we speak, the Anglican Ordinariates are living out their lives trying to answer exactly that question. Part of it's liturgical. Because unlike the majority of the Latin Rite that liturgically speaking, well, as Pope Benedict put it, where there's applause at Mass, the spirit of the liturgy has fled.
Yeah.
What does that mean, ladies and gentlemen? Is there applause at most Masses? Oh, I know we're Catholic and we can't ever be honest. I know. I know. But you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
The solemnity that you will find in the Anglican Ordinariate at their liturgy is part of that patrimony we want to preserve. The theological patrimony, the devotional patrimony, and this brings us to the question of the devotional societies, unless you thought I was simply rambling pointlessly. Not that I'm incapable of rambling pointlessly, and some of you have seen me do it. What? That's true, I can.
Yeah.
You've seen me do it.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, remember first and foremost, what is an Anglo-Catholic? An Anglo-Catholic is a member of a wing of Anglicanism that developed in the 19th century, although it claims roots further back. First and foremost, Henry VIII, as we know, breaks from Rome. Now, Henry does not decide, he does not want to start a new Protestant church. He wants a Catholic church that will do what he wants. Kind of like Louis XIV and other people like that.
Yeah.
Who came later. But he doesn't get his way with the Pope. So he declares himself the supreme governor of the Church of England. Well, he doesn't change the teachings. He doesn't even change the Mass much. But then he dies. And all of the Protestants who had, like Cranmer, who had flattered him, they take over the show. Edward VI is a boy. He's trained to be a good Protestant. Cranmer, in 1549, brings out the first Book of Common Prayer, which is an English version of the Sarum use of the Latin Mass. Slightly Protestantized, but only slightly. A few years later, he brings out the 1552 book, much more Protestantized.
Yeah.
And then the following year, of course, Edward dies. Queen Mary comes back. Cranmer gets burned like a little crispy critter, as we used to say when I was young. The church is reestablished for a few years. She dies. Elizabeth is accepted as queen on the proviso that she'll maintain the Marian settlement. She doesn't. And renews the Church of England. And it's really under Elizabeth that the Church of England became what we think of as the Church of England. Because you've got three different currents in it. You've got the very Protestant types, the Puritans and all that. You've got the very Catholicizing type who want to be Catholic and everything but the Pope. And then you've got the middle of the roaders who are, just happy with whatever. Those three have characterized Anglican life from that time to this. But under Elizabeth, died without an heir, without a child anyway. So it went to her murdered cousin's son, James I. James VI of Scotland, first of England, fellow who gave us the King James Bible, of which the best thing I've ever heard was, well, the King James Bible is good enough for Jesus Christ, good enough for me. And straight. What?
That's amazing.
I thought so. He had nothing quite like historical knowledge, and that was nothing quite like historical knowledge.
Yeah.
Anyway, so James, who married a Catholic, was Anne of Denmark, but under whom a number of Catholics were murdered, especially because of the gunpowder plot. The Guy Fawkes and his friends tried to blow up the king in Parliament, and their reaction was not optimal to this. Although I have to say, too, that movie, V for Vendetta, that manages to use Guy Fawkes as a symbol of freedom without ever pointing out that he died for his religion. It's a little bit like a documentary on Martin Luther King that leaves out the whole race issue.
Yeah.
You'd say, well, yeah, what was the deal? Well, he was for freedom.
Okay.
Anyway, so what should happen but that James dies, his son Charles becomes king. Now Charles is married to a Catholic, Henrietta Marie of France. his two oldest sons, of course, were both dyed Catholic. He had begun negotiations with Rome in the 1620s, even before he was king. This was held out against him later at his trial.
Mm-hmm.
In addition to his, well, I'll get there. So he decides he wants to Catholicize the Church of England. Now, by this time, you've got to understand the Church of England had become very Protestant. Very Protestant. But he believes in the real presence, which most people don't. He believes in the intercession of the saints, of the Virgin Mary, which most people do at that point.
Mm-hmm.
So he appoints this guy, Archbishop Laud, who was no great friend of the Pope's, I can tell you, to Catholicize the Church of England. And he begins to do so. And ritual, candles back on the altar rails back, eastward facing, all that kind of stuff. So much so that the Pope offers Laud the red hat.
Okay.
Now, Laud's the Archbishop of Canterbury.
Yeah.
But the Pope offers him the red hat.
Okay.
As to be a cardinal.
Right, yeah, I understand.
Now, number one, he couldn't have done that without Charles's permission. Laud laughingly refuses it.
Okay.
But the understanding of the ecclesiology of the Church of England on the part of Rome at that time was different to ours now. You see what I'm saying? The distinctions were not nearly so clear.
Yeah. I understand.
So, and that's why they're much clearer now. If I, as a member of the Church of England, with my Bishopess of London,
Yeah.
and all that stuff, if I tell you I'm a Catholic,
Yeah.
that's one thing. Back then,
Yeah.
it's a little...
Strange organic process.
Exactly. By which this dissolution became greater and greater and greater and greater. Once again, it's like with the Eastern Orthodox. In truth, that schism has no legal existence. Not anymore. And so when you start looking into that, when you look into the saints that the Holy See has allowed us to venerate post-schism,
Mm-hmm.
when you look at Pius IX inviting the Eastern Orthodox patriarchs to participate in Vatican I as full participants, it gets really strange and gooey. And I would be lying if I told you that I had any straight answer to it either. But if you're not going to get one out of the Pope, don't look at it from me. At any rate, so Charles I inherits with the throne a number of priests in jail. So what does he do? Does he pardon them? No. He felt this politically would be a little difficult to do. What he does do is he lets them go visit their flocks during the day and come back to the prisons at night. So it's sort of like running a rest home for priests.
Mm-hmm.
But as we know, he ran out of money. He fought the war with the Scots. He called Parliament back into session after having done without Parliament for 11 years. And the Long Parliament, as it's called, takes over and not only executes all the Catholic priests in jail, it executes William Laud, the Archbishop of Canterbury.
Wow.
And his Charles's major helper, Strafford. So, I mean, if he wasn't able to save Laud, and he wasn't able to save Strafford, it's a little much to think he was going to be able to save any Catholic martyrs.
Yeah.
And then he raises his banner at Nottingham. He goes to war. And all the Catholics in his kingdoms rally behind him against Cromwell. And of course, eventually he's defeated. They have a kangaroo court trial. He's offered his life if he'll consent to the abolition of bishops in the Church of England. He refuses.
Mm.
Hence his point that he died a member of the Church of England as was given him by his father.
I see.
See, if you look at this stuff outside of context, it's easy to draw a quick conclusion. All right, so that's the end of him. You have the whole Stuart adventure, then the Hanoverians, and by the early 19th century, the Church of England is, shall we say, very Protestant. But then something funny happens. the Romantic movement, and Sir Walter Scott.
Mm-hmm.
And also, because of the French Revolution, you had a lot of English, Scots, and Irish Catholic institutions that had been in exile for 300 years come back to England, Scotland, and Ireland. So once again, you've got convents, you've got Catholic schools and all that, which you hadn't had in centuries. And the result of all this ferment was what was called the Oxford movement. The Oxford movement was led by two men. A man named John Henry Newman and a man by the name of Pusey. I think Edward Bouverie Pusey, I think. I may be wrong. Anyway, so Pusey and Newman were the ringleaders. And the idea of the Oxford movement was that they would re-Catholicize the Church of England. And that was the start of Anglo-Catholicism. Now eventually Newman and a lot of his supporters figured this isn't going to go anywhere. They became Catholic directly. But a lot of them didn't feel that way. And they continued what was called Anglo-Catholicism. Now, in doing so, they did a lot of stuff. They produced reams and reams of very solid theological work and republications and retranslations of medieval English Catholic stuff. They created a liturgy that was very like the Tridentine Mass in English. Because their priests were very unpopular among the Anglican bishops, so they get stuck in slums.
Mm-hmm.
And they would go to work building these beautiful churches in the slums and all that. And, processions and high masses in utter dumps. And these were called the slum priests. There had not been a great deal of interest in evangelizing the non-whites in the British Empire before this. But you had orders of Anglo-Catholics founded, and they went out to convert the heathen.
Mm-hmm.
It was a very peculiar time. All of that is part of the so-called Anglican patrimony, this history. Now, there was more to it, and that was what were called the Anglican devotional societies. Because what did they say? Real Catholics do what? They don't believe in the real presence, but they adore the Blessed Sacrament as God Himself. So that was the foundation of something called the Confraternity of the Blessed Sacrament, which is dedicated to just that.
Mm.
Well, Catholics pray to Our Lady. That was the origin of the Society of Mary. They pray for the dead, and thus you have the Guild of All Souls. Now, about 1859, Charles I, who had been canonized by the Anglicans after Cromwell was gotten rid of and Charles I became king, they canonized him.
Okay.
Now, the only one they've ever done that to. But in 1859, his day was removed from the Book of Common Prayer. So the same sort of people that had established all these other societies thought that was terrible, and we need to bring back the devotion to Charles I, who was both a defender of the apostolic succession and, for some anyway, not all of them saw them this way, a pioneer of unity between England and Rome. And so the Society of King Charles the Martyr was born. This is all in the 19th century. Okay, so what do we have? Well, fast forward to the present. Anglo-Catholicism became a big movement. It probably had its apogee immediately before, during, and after World War II. It became a big, big, big thing. And then it began to fall apart. Now, there had always been two strands in it. Those who felt that their job would not be complete until all of Anglicanism was reunited with the Catholic Church under the Pope. And those who felt, no, we don't need the Pope. We're Catholic as we are. Those two tendencies were always like that.
Mm.
Anglicanism as a whole began to crumble theologically in the 1960s, the same time that we did. And the crumbling went a lot further, though. I mean, imagine someone like some of our current leadership in charge since the 60s. That kind of mindset.
Mm.
And that gives you a taste of what the Anglicans went through. Well, pardon me, ladies and gentlemen, this is a little rude, but the back of my neck hurts. So there you are. I'm human. I bleed. It's true, like Shylock.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, anyway, I hope all this story is making sense to you.
It is.
All right. So, what finally happened was that when the Pope, Benedict XVI, decreed that as groups of Anglicans had come to the Holy See asking for a refuge, as it were, because what they'd come to understand was that it wasn't simply a question of view or opinion, but a question of ecclesiology and authority. He recognized that they had either preserved from the Middle Ages or reinvented or started anew a lot of things that were of value to the Catholic Church, and particularly the Latin Church as it is now, since it's become, and he was certainly the first to say, a liturgical and devotional wasteland. When the Pope said the vast majority of Catholics are liturgically and doctrinally illiterate, this was not a compliment.
Okay.
All right. One thing that the Anglicans had coming with them in the church is a very fine tradition of scholarship, amongst other things. So all of this stuff is part of the Anglican patrimony. And with it, the whole purpose of the ordinariates is severalfold. One, partly to provide a home to those Anglicans coming into the church and other English-speaking Protestants. Secondly, to preserve all that's good in the Anglican patrimony for the use of the Catholic Church as a whole. And thirdly, to assist in the conversion of the Anglosphere. Because, over the several centuries, Catholicism has become to seem for a lot of English speakers very foreign, very alien. It's not, but that's how it seems.
Yeah.
And the ordinariates and the sort of Anglo-Catholicism they represent may very well be precisely the kind of thing to bring these folk into the church.
I remember you said in Star Spangled Crown, in your Star Spangled Crowniverse, that the ordinariates swallow up a lot of Protestantism, and bring them into the Catholic Church. And I think I asked you this in person, and you said that's because the ordinariates understand Protestantism and they care about the Protestants in a way where perhaps cradle Catholics don't really care about.
No, well, we don't.
Yeah.
We don't believe in evangelizing.
Yeah.
I mean, and when I say that, I don't mean to say that we sit around saying we don't believe in it and they can all fry in hell. Firstly, we don't believe they will fry in hell. We don't believe they need to be Catholic. We don't believe there's any necessity to be Catholic. Of course, as Benedict XVI has said, that takes away any reason to be Catholic, and it takes away any reason to try to evangelize. So we're prisoners of the theological false trail we've been down for a long time. But what you find with the people of the ordinariates is that they're very much believers in the necessity of the church. And they are very keen to bring as many of their own into the church as possible.
Mm-hmm.
We should feel that way. The fact that we don't reflects badly on us.
Yeah.
See, we're the problem children. And, we were taught this. And it's one reason why, because the salvation of souls is no longer an interest of ours, it's why so many of our clergy have become God's bureaucrats. With no real care, apparently, for the souls of their faithful, because it's just not on their menu.
Yeah.
So, anyway, my last point in all this is that as far as the Anglo-Catholic devotional societies go, the ones I mentioned in particular, I would assert that they have no real future outside the ordinariates.
Okay. That leads me to an impromptu question.
Okay?
On a totally different
topic.
Yeah.
Oh, that makes it even better.
Yeah. I know a lot of people who are huge fans of C.S. Lewis. They're Catholic, and they're wondering how Catholic C.S. Lewis is. So I was wondering to what extent, where does C.S. Lewis fit on this Anglican patrimony?
That's a very good question.
Because he's very similar. I've read a lot of stuff, and he espouses some of the distinctly Catholic beliefs.
He sure does. But the major difference is that he was an Ulster Scout,
What is that?
a person from Northern Ireland. He was a Protestant.
Okay.
And he really, according to, what's his name, Philip Trower, is that the name? A gentleman who knew him very well, and he wrote C.S. Lewis in the Church of Rome. What kept Lewis out of the Church of England, and bear in mind, not being a king with the responsibility for an entire country on his head, but a private individual, it's a somewhat different setup. But what kept Lewis out of the church was his ethnicity, was his being a Northern Irishman.
Oh.
To become a Catholic would be to betray his people.
Interesting.
Now, mind you, so I mean, you've got a very different setup there. Now, having said that, so much of what Lewis writes, especially his fiction, is certainly a part of the patrimony to be used. But it's a little bit like the church father Tertullian, who died outside the church. You know, everyone calls him a church father, and they quote him and all that. His arguments are useful. But nobody considers Tertullian a saint.
Right.
And nobody would consider C.S. Lewis a saint. You know, I hope he figured out before his last breath what the story was. But I wouldn't bet on it. However, you know, if somebody else wants to go out and start a C.S. Lewis society with the idea of seeing what Rome would make of him, I'm all for it. I have to say, you know, there are some servants of God today, that is, with causes that have actually been officially opened, like Julius Nyeri, who was the first president of Tanzania. Let's put it this way. Every servant of God, same with Dorothy Day, same with Queen Isabella, they have inborn supporters and inborn critics.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
It's just the way it is. And so until someone is actually beatified or canonized, you can think whatever you want about them. Personally, I wish all the servants of God well. I really do, even if it's somebody that in personal life I wouldn't have liked. Because you know what? If so-and-so got in,
then you're
well, let's just say
you have a chance.
Yeah, it makes things better for me.
Okay.
And the other thing too to bear in mind that's kind of great, I think. One of the things I love about the church is the way they would handle stuff of this sort. In the old method of canonization, the devil's advocate would do everything he possibly could to prove this person was not a saint.
Yeah.
Absolutely everything. All right. But let's say, as of course is always the case, a saint is canonized. What happens to the devil's advocate? You ever wonder?
You've said this on a previous episode. I loved it. He repents and he prays for forgiveness. That saint.
Yeah, isn't that neat?
That's awesome.
Yeah, I think that's great. Of course, if he does manage to knock the person out. Fortunately, though, the promoter of the cause does not have to do that.
Would he celebrate if he knocked the person out? Like,
I don't think so.
Oh, okay.
It's not something.
Okay, not something pleasant. Okay.
No, it's not. I don't think it's anything that would make him happy.
Yeah. Okay.
Watch us get a note from someone who actually does know this. So, well, my great uncle Horace McManus was the devil's advocate who knocked out Sister Dorothy of the Blessed Sacrament Exposed, and boy did he party when he won. You know, if it's something like that and you have personal knowledge, ladies and gentlemen, feel free to let me know.
Okay, next question is from Aryeh Ben Avraham.
Okay.
Charles, did you ever consider becoming a priest?
Yes, I sure did. It was the hardest 3 minutes of my life.
3 minutes?
It was very difficult. No, it was longer than that. I did when I was about 14, 15. I talked over with my father, and he asked me a very interesting question. And of course, understand, ladies and gentlemen, this is a very personal thing for the lad who's undergoing it. And so what I'm going to say may not apply to everybody, but it certainly resonated with me. My father said to me, well, let me ask you, if you could say Mass, if you had the power to bring our Lord down on the altar, and for some reason on a given day we couldn't, would you be that upset? And I thought about it, I said, probably not. I said, well, then you shouldn't be a priest. Because above all, your dedication should be to bringing God down on the altar every day.
Wow.
And if that doesn't consume you, if the service of the liturgy does not entirely consume you, you have no business being a priest. So, that pretty much turned me off, but he did say, you will, however, probably end up being some sort of weird lay theologian. And sure enough, I ended up being some sort of weird lay theologian. Although I'm not a theologian, I'm an historian, but you get the idea.
Yeah.
But no, I didn't think of it for long. I mean, part of the problem, too, is that while I knew some very admirable priests, I could count them on both hands. And that's a problem. In my time, speaking frankly, the priests were the people who tore everything apart, who ripped things to shreds, and I didn't care for them. And the idea of becoming one of them was repellent. Now, it's an unfortunate thing to have to say, but it's true.
It's interesting. You wonder to what extent that's the reason for the crisis in vocations.
Well, I mean, also, today when you've got seminaries that do their best to keep Orthodox, straight lads out, is there really a crisis of vocations? Or is it a crisis of morons in charge?
Yeah.
I mean, I've got a friend, I won't mention the name, but he had a relation, and she was in charge of keeping the straight Orthodox guys out of seminary. Who knows how many vocations she destroyed? And legion for their many. All over this great nation of ours, and all across this wonderful globe, you had these very often women, as though a woman would know what it was to be a priest.
Yeah.
How come I'm not in charge of vetting ladies going into the convent? Well, maybe because I'm not ever going to be a nun and don't have any understanding of what's required. Maybe that's why. Anyway, these folks did their level best to keep what any believing Catholic would consider the very best out of said seminaries. And we will never know this side of the grave how many beautiful vocations were destroyed by these people. I guarantee you, though, that when they die, they'll find out. Down to the very last.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, I have one of the my rare questions for you.
Oh, boy.
It's on the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve is a modern financial instrument that we've never needed in the past, but now it's seen as the foundational, crucial piece of our modern economy.
Oh, boy.
Its influence on markets is enormous.
That's true.
What's your opinion on the Federal Reserve? Is it a good thing or a bad thing?
Well, we've got some very beautiful buildings.
Oh, I've never seen them.
Oh, yes. The architecture of most Federal Reserve banks is quite lovely. Not all, most. The old ones. But that was true of banks in general. When I was a kid, banks tended to be very impressive-looking buildings. But that probably is not what you're after. As an institution, the reason why we didn't need the Federal Reserve Bank once upon a time was because Congress and the government were limited as to how much they could produce in the way of dollars. There had to be 100 cents of gold on hand for each dollar.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what did that mean? It meant that you could only have so many dollars. Just as a limited number.
Yeah.
1912 comes along, and we'd had a couple of panics and all that. Initially, in the beginning of the country, we had two central banks. And a central bank are the people, the government bank, that look after the flow of money for and also play banker, for a given government. We had two of these, both of them called the Bank of the United States. Oddly enough, called the first Bank of the United States, the second Bank of the United States. Andrew Jackson was of the opinion that the central government, the federal government, should not have that kind of control over the money supply beyond minting it. So he allowed the charter of the second bank to lapse. And from that time until 1912, we had no central bank. We had a lot of other banks. And these other banks would print paper money based upon what was supposed to be the holdings in their vaults. I say supposed to be.
Mm-hmm.
Because, of course, they'd always print more. And every now and then there'd be a run on the bank, and that's why they had these panics and all that.
Interesting.
So to keep that from happening, they came up with the idea of once again putting together a central bank. But this central bank would not be owned by the federal government.
Why not?
I don't know. There are reasons for it, I don't know what they were. What I do know is that the Federal Reserve Bank is actually owned by its stockholders, although the director of the Fed is appointed by the government. And just to make things a little more confusing for you, the entirety of the money in circulation is actually a loan by the Federal Reserve Bank to the United States government.
Wow. Okay.
However, it's a loan that will never be called in.
Now, part of the reason why I was thinking about this question for you is because in one episode, many episodes ago, you talked about, you suggested it's immoral to inflate money. You
Yes.
seem to suggest that.
I did.
And so the purpose of the Federal Reserve is to manage inflation.
Yeah.
As if inflation is a universal constant. It's accepted.
Well, it is now.
Now you seem to suggest that there shouldn't be inflation. That the fact that there's inflation is an immoral use of money.
Yeah. I mean, well, the thing is, we've gotten so far down this path that it's the only frame of reference we have. Think back to the Great Depression. All right. Now, at that time, we had the Federal Reserve Bank, but we also had the whole 100 cents to the dollar thing. The Depression came along, and what was the biggest thing that hit the American economy? It was deflation. Salaries fell and prices fell.
Yeah.
And production ground to a halt. So jobs, ended. Well, what to do? What the President, Franklin Roosevelt, and his advisors came to think was that what was needed was inflation. A bigger money supply would stimulate the economy. People would begin working again, people would thus demand stuff, and the economy would get on a move. He also had the bright idea of calling in all our foreign debts, which did nothing except to spread the depression across the globe.
Wow.
But, well, it was called the beggar my neighbor policy, and it didn't work out very well.
Okay.
But at any rate, so what does he do? In 1933, he calls in all the gold, all the privately owned gold. And everybody surrenders it, except for jewelry and coin collections.
Mm-hmm.
And then takes charge of it, and he declares that from now on, the dollar only needs to be backed by 33 cents of gold. What does that mean? It means that they can release 2/3 more paper money into the economy. And they do.
Yeah.
And then he puts through a whole bunch of public works schemes and electrification of places, lots of different things all at the same time. None of it really worked, but it seemed to. What really got us out of the Depression was World War II.
Yeah.
But at any rate, that began what was called, instead of the gold standard, the gold exchange standard. And that limited the exchange of gold to central banks dealing with each other. It's interesting, do you know what the highest denomination of U.S. currency is? Ever, I mean.
Ever?
Yeah,
I don't know. 10,000?
Nope. Well, the $10,000 bill, we stopped making them in 1973, but we had them.
Okay, what's the highest denomination?
100,000.
Wow.
It's got Woodrow Wilson's face on it. But it's only used for transactions between federal banks.
Wow. Federal banks do cash transactions?
Uh-huh.
That's interesting.
$100,000 here. I always fantasized, when I first found out about that in elementary school, I fantasized about somehow getting my hands on one, taking it to the gas station, buying some corn nuts and asking for change. But The no, now $500 bills used to be fairly common,
Interesting.
but
It's strange that they used to be common and now money is more inflated, and now you'd think they're more, practical.
yeah, well, you would. I mean, they got rid of them under Nixon. You had the 10,000, the 5,000, the 1,000, the 500,
Okay.
and then you got rid of all that.
Interesting.
Oh, well. So, at any rate, to answer your question, we have institutionalized inflation,
Okay.
which is a little bit like institutionalizing abortion. I don't know. It's not a good thing, but I'm not being an economist. I can't tell you how to escape it.
Okay. I have a follow-up question to this, which is, would the Federal Reserve have a place in your Star-Spangled Crowniverse?
Oh,
Would the king keep it, or would the king abolish the Federal Reserve?
he'd probably nationalize it and make it the Bank of the United States,
Okay.
and take back money policy into his own hands.
Okay. Interesting.
Actually, I suppose I shouldn't say this in front of you, but the beginning of the novel I sent you is actually set in the Star-Spangled Crowniverse of the far future.
The sci-fi thing?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
So I don't want to stimulate you to read it or anything.
Uh-oh. Well, we're going to have a clamor from our fans now. Franchini needs to read that, and you guys need to publish it.
I wouldn't say that, ladies and gentlemen, but let them read it. They may know a lot more about it than you do. And this thing is garbage. Well, maybe they're right. So leave them alone. Besides, the suits are going to be demanding more than we want out of them anyway.
Yeah.
Producer, get out.
Okay, next question is from superfan Jonathan Bennett.
Yes, superfan.
What can Charles tell us about that mysterious and arcane organization based at Paray-le-Monial in France, the Hiéron du Val, and of the various people associated with it?
Nothing. Next. No, I actually can't tell you something about that. All right, well, the Hiéron du Val looks like Hiéron du Val d'Or, which means sort of the sanctuary of the Valley of Gold.
Mm-hmm.
The Val d'Or being the old name of the area of Paray-le-Monial. Paray-le-Monial is a city in France, in Burgundy, which is dedicated today. It's the major shrine to the Sacred Heart of Jesus, that being where our Lord appeared to St. Margaret Mary Alacoque. All right. Well, in the 1870s, a Jesuit priest named Father, I think it was Victor Drevon, and a Spanish nobleman, the Baron Alexis de Sarrachaga, created the Hiéron, which was several things at once. It had another name, the Institut de Faste, the Institute of Fasting, of reparative fasting. One was to promote devotion to the Sacred Heart of Jesus, but especially the aspect of the social reign of Christ, the social kingship of Christ. This included fasting and penance to make reparation to our Lord for the abuse he's gotten from us in so many ways, and also to explore the symbolism of the Eucharist and the Sacred Heart, the precious blood, and things like that. And they built a museum, which is still there, to exhibit their collection showing this wonderful symbolism, and also to investigate all sorts of strange and esoteric phenomena, which was very popular in the 19th century, to see what relationship, if any, they had to the Catholic faith. This society continued after Drevon died. Some other priest became their chaplain, I forget who. De Sarrachaga himself lived into the 1920s. And they had both Italian and Spanish followers, and they were big pushers of consecration, to national consecration of the Sacred Heart and the establishment of the kingship of Christ. As I've said, it contributed a good deal to the climate whereby Pius XI proclaimed the kingship of Christ in Ques Primas. They were monarchists, of course. Very, very interesting bunch. One of their last chairman was a fellow called Louis Charbonneau, I think de Lossay or something. But he wrote a book called The Bestiary of Christ, which was a book of symbolism of how different animals have been seen as representing Christ down through the ages. So again, they're very interesting people, interested in symbolism and legends and folklore and all kinds of good stuff.
Okay. Yeah.
For a while, René Guénon wrote for their magazine Regnabit, but Guénon pursued the notion of there being this tradition that transcended any given religion, and that was salvific and so on and so forth. And he went off and became a Muslim. So he had a big break with the Hiéron, I can tell you.
Okay.
But again, it's one of these things where because he wrote for the Hiéron, and people who've heard of it say, "Oh, well, the Hiéron were terrible. They were Guénonists, weren't they? Guénon wrote for them." No. Guénon did write for them, but Guénon became what we call a Guénoniste, which is why they broke with it.
Okay.
So there you go.
Are there any other reasons why Jonathan Bennett would call it an arcane organization?
Well, yeah, because they were interested in all sorts of arcane phenomena. Sort of like the people that we saw in the Ghost Book of Sir Sean Leslie.
Ah.
So there was that aspect to their work, which was, I must say, approved by Leo XIII. So if you're more Catholic than Leo XIII, have at it.
Okay, next question is from Jacobite Joe.
Hello, Jacobite Joe.
What are your thoughts on Italian unification? Was it good or bad?
Well, this is one of those questions like which of the colonial powers were the better, that we have a certain common sense question we can ask to begin with. Prior to 1860, and the accomplishment of the bigger part of Italian unification, very, very few Italians left Italy. After it was accomplished in 1870, literally millions of Italians moved out to the Americas, Australia, South Africa. So you have to ask yourself.
Yeah. Usually people migrate from situations that are bad. If things are good, they don't migrate.
No, hang out. So what did Italian unification really mean? Well, 1815 comes along. Napoleon's defeated. His settlement of the Italian peninsula is gotten rid of. And Italy is returned to something approaching its former state. I say something, because there's no more Venetian or Genoese republics. Genoa becomes part of the Kingdom of Sardinia. Venice and Venetia are given to Austria with Lombardy, which they already had. And that becomes the Lombardo-Venetian Kingdom. There's the name for you. The Grand Duchy of Tuscany, the Duchy of Modena are under branches of the House of Habsburg. These are little countries. The Duchy of Parma is under a Bourbon branch. You have the Papal States under the Pope. And lastly, southern Italy, including Bari.
Yeah, my people.
Your people are under the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies, which is headed by another branch of the Bourbons. All right. So all these three kingdoms and duchies are conservative, Catholic, nice places. And they abolished two of the things that Bonaparte had brought in: conscription and heavy taxation.
What was heavy for that time?
Well, income tax for starters.
Okay.
People in those days, they generally got their taxes off sales and things like that.
Okay.
And they had other taxes, but the income wasn't generally touched. Well, what happens? A couple of things. In 1831, the main line of the House of Savoy dies out, and they're replaced by distant cousins who are of a liberal persuasion. They in turn get a prime minister by the name of Cavour. And Cavour is a liberal. He wants to see all of Italy united under the House of Savoy. So what does he do to do this? Well, the first thing he does is he brings in income tax and stuff like that. And he brings a conscription to build up the biggest army in the Italian peninsula.
Great.
So he does that. Then the Crimean War breaks out. And Sardinia, Britain and France have declared war on Russia. They're fighting the Crimea. Sardinia declares war on Russia and sends a tiny expeditionary force
Okay.
to join the French and the British. So now they're allies.
Okay.
Isn't that neat?
Yeah.
And he got him what he wanted. Because in the meantime, France under Napoleon III is very much the arch rivals of Austria. Now remember, Austria has that Lombardy place.
Yeah.
And Austria is the guarantor of the peace of the peninsula. So, Cavour convinces Napoleon that what he really wants to do is to make war on Austria. And they do.
Wow.
And they defeat the Austrians in return for giving them Nice and Savoy, which were French-speaking parts of Sardinia. Napoleon gives them Lombardy, which they've conquered. Well, that's 1859.
Okay.
Now it's time to take on the rest of the peninsula. And he does. Parma, Modena, the northernmost portion of the Papal States. And then he releases Garibaldi from jail, and Garibaldi begins the conquest of Naples. He starts out, he lands in Sicily, and he fights all the way around, ending up in Naples. And then, of course, the biggest chunk of the Papal States are also taken over. And then Garibaldi gives up his conquest to the House of Savoy. In 1865, I think, 1867, the Savoys moved from Turin, which had been their capital forever, to Florence. In 1866, Austria goes to war with Prussia. And the Italians jump in on the side of Prussia because they want to get Venice. So what happens? Well, the Prussians defeat the Austrians, but the Austrians defeat the Italians.
Okay.
They sink their navy and they smash their army. But Prussia insists that they give them Venice anyway, so they get it, 1866.
Okay.
Finally, Prussia goes to war with France in 1870. The French withdraw their garrison from Rome. The Italians invade. The Pope tells his men to lay down their arms because he doesn't want bloodshed. And September 20th, 1870 is the fall of Rome and the proclamation of the Kingdom of Italy.
Wow.
So, afterwards, there's resistance for about 10 years, which they call brigandage, especially in the South. And a ton of Italians leave to go to the places I've said.
But why? I mean, was it
Because
good or bad?
They didn't want to be conscripted, and they didn't want to be taxed, so they left. Was it good or bad? I think it was bad. I mean, ideally, Italy would have been a federation the way Germany became, preserving the different houses in their own right. But all in all, I'd say it was probably a bad thing, the way it was accomplished.
Okay. Garibaldi, good or bad?
Garibaldi?
Yeah.
Bad.
Okay. Okay, our last question is from Rob.
Hi, Rob.
Has there ever been a council within the church that has contradicted established doctrine, such as the Second Vatican Council does, on subjects of ecumenism, religious liberty, and collegiality? I'm familiar with the Pistorius Synod and the so-called Robber Council, but are there other contradictions from council and council?
Well,
great question.
It is. First thing you have to say is, did Vatican II, in fact, deny church teaching? And you've also got to ask yourself, what was the standing of Vatican II as a council anyway? Well, we know several things about Vatican II. One is that John the 23rd declared when he opened it that he was not invoking infallibility upon it. We know that when Paul VI closed it, he declared that infallibility had not been invoked upon him. There were no anathemas.
That's true.
And then later, when it was put out to Paul VI, that a lot of what was written there could be given an unorthodox reading, his response was that whenever there appeared to be that sort of a thing, it had to be read in accordance with earlier tradition. And if it seemed to contradict earlier tradition, it had to be disregarded. So, you can then get lost into the minutiae of whether or not you can reconcile this or that part of Vatican II with prior teaching, which is a whole other episode of minutiae. But you don't have to.
No?
No! There are no anathemas.
That's true.
Where Paul VI said, if it appears to disregard prior teaching, you can disregard it. All right?
That's easy.
Yeah.
Wow, that really makes things simple.
Doesn't it?
Gosh, I thought it was such a complicated mess before that.
It was, but now it's easy. No, I mean, ladies and gentlemen, people tend to twist themselves into knots. The very fact that this council did not invoke infallibility and did not have it conferred upon it by a later pope shows to you that it is not the big A-market thing you think it is.
Wow.
So, again, to quote Paul VI, if it seems to contradict prior teaching, then you can let it pass. Now, when Benedict became Pope, he addressed this issue in his Christmas message to the Curia. And there he said there had been indeed change from prior teaching, but only in areas which were themselves not infallible, because there were reason. Now, whether or not that's true, it doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
Because as far as he's concerned, if those things are contingent, and to change them is contingent, then the changes themselves are contingent.
I see. Wow.
So, I wouldn't worry about Vatican II.
This was great. I was going to go into the minutia, into the weeds, and you just said, no, you don't need to do that.
No, well, I mean, there's this Australian theologian, I think, John Lamont, made a very interesting point. He talked about the Society of St. Pius X in the Council. He says they accept at least 80% of the Council. It's only 10 to 20% they reject.
Yeah.
He says, but to me, the real story here is not that they reject that 20%, but that the 80% they agree with is not accepted by a large number of bishops and seminary directors.
Right.
That. So maybe when you can make bishops and seminary directors accept the 80%, we can talk about the rest of it.
Okay.
Huh?
Well, that will do it for this episode. If you enjoyed listening to Charles, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. Don't forget, for all you super fans, keep liking our videos. It helps a lot.
Yeah, please. And bear in mind also, ladies and gentlemen, as this Lenten season continues, that we'll be here literally praying for crumbs from the table of our betters.
Yeah, we will. We will be. Okay, so we'll see you next time.
Take care. Be good.